Welcome back, my friend, to another episode of As It Relates to Podcasting. I'm Simona. I am your host today, and joining me is my friend Ana Xavier. You are going to absolutely love our conversation today because we are talking about mastering podcast analytics. And in this episode, we're deep diving into these different analytics and understanding them in a more significant way, and starting with the significance of understanding IAB stats versus other metrics. We're also going to be offering a few different options and insights for podcast managers who can't access a client's full backend spectrum of their podcast. And we'll also talk about effective analysis even with limited access. Our conversation also addresses the crucial art of listening and understanding the content to decode the numbers effectively. We're emphasizing that podcasts are interconnected with the broader media landscape, and we're talking about exploring how to simplify content for a better listener experience. We give different strategies, different techniques, and different tools that you can use to understand your podcast analytics way more significantly. Ana is the founder and CEO of the podcast space, is a multilingual award-winning professional with experience in global podcasting and a heart for impact-driven entrepreneurs. I know you've gotten to love Ana over our last few episodes together. She is such a wealth of knowledge. Be sure to connect with her and just say hello, connect with me and say hello. Let me know that you're listening to this conversation. Rate and review the show. It's how we get into the hands of more listeners. It's how we grow, and it's how we help other creators access this information that I know they need to learn just like you. Now, before we get into our conversation, I do want to emphasize and highlight that my membership program is available and is open for enrollment. It's $11 a month or $121 a year. And in this membership, you get a full access to every single resource that you need when it comes to launching, producing, managing, monetizing, growing, and strategizing your show. So be sure to go and check out the membership program. It's such a low ticket because I want to make sure that every creator has access to all of the assets and all of the information that they need in order to really create a podcast that is impactful and that is important and that is inspiring. So the link for that is in the show notes below. Now, how about we get into our conversation with Ana? Ana, welcome back to our third part of our four-part series on As It Relates to Podcasting. I'm so excited to have you back here today.
Oh my gosh, I'm excited to be here on this third part. We are breaking down so many things, and I was like, let's go.
I'm so excited. And I will say for our listener today, because, you know, if you're a listener of this podcast and you've listened to other episodes, past episodes, you'll know that I am no stranger to tech issues. Tech issues happen to me all the time. And I talk about them on here too. But like my camera pretty much always dies every single time I'm doing some kind of recording. Something freezes, something drops off, like just something happens. And it's okay. It is what it is. Like we just move on and it is what it is. You just have to learn how to like roll with it. But you just said something so funny. We've been talking about like girl dinner throughout this entire series, as you know, if you've listened to the last episode. We're going to start a new trend. Ana, thoughts?
Yes. Tech issues. Oh, girl, tech issues. Because that happens all the time too. So, but hey, like if anything, like actually funny enough, persistence, we were talking about like pulling Oracle cards and stuff. And like we did pull like persistence as a card. So I guess like that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing as a theme. And podcasting, that's something that you always have to persist because so much stuff will happen that you're like, oh my gosh, what the hell?
Exactly. Yeah. And you're like, okay, this is great. And I feel like, honestly, I get so excited to record my podcast. And then I feel like every time I actually sit down to like record, I always have 1,000,005 tech issues that it's just kind of become so second nature now that I'm like, well, it is what it is and it's going to happen and it's fine. You know what I mean? And I think that when we get hung up, going back to like the last two episodes that we've done together, getting too hung up on the perfection side and like what things should be. And it's like, oh my goodness, but the quality isn't going to be good. And it's just kind of like, you know what? It is what it is. Like you can't make things happen in life. They just happen. And there's always a reason.
Yeah. I look at it and I was like, it's content. It's content. Anything, it's content. It's like, okay, what tech issue? One time I literally was like, oh, please, I'm really hoping that something goes wrong so I can talk about it.
I actually love that. And I feel like I probably could, if I had a penny for every single time I had a tech issue.
Millionaire.
I'd be retired. Okay. So today, in today's episode, we are talking about understanding podcast analytics. And this is actually a topic that I've had requested from a couple listeners now, people who've messaged me on Instagram, which I'm so grateful for, and hearing from you and, you know, talking about different topics that you want to hear about. Analytics is always one of them because I think that there's so much that goes into understanding our podcast analytics. Do you want to first start with I was going to ask you like your top tip when it comes to understanding analytics, but I almost feel like we have to go back just like for a hot second and talk about IAB stats versus all the other ones.
All right, so let's start with something that we're not going to get into the nitty gritty. Do not turn off this episode just yet. So basically, this is the Interactive Advertising Bureau. So basically, this tracks the podcast data that is saying, yep, anything that matches these criteria is good to go. This is reliable. And podcast hosting platforms like, Spreaker, Podbean, Captivate, they have to go through a very thorough process in order to get the certification. And it's either you are certified or you're not. And so the issue with platforms that sometimes are free is that when you're looking at numbers, there's a lot of traffic that is fake traffic. All right. So, when you're looking at Instagram and a lot of people say I have 1.2 million followers and maybe 700,000 are actually fake people, right? They don't even exist. So the same thing happens with podcast downloads. And so a lot of people pay for downloads. A lot of people go through these whole process to just showcase that they're more knowledgeable than they are, their community is bigger than it is. And so making sure that you're picking a hosting platform that where your content is that is certified by this organization makes sure that you have data that is accurate. And you may say, Anna, having fake downloads doesn't sound that bad, but the problem is you're actually fooling yourself because you don't really know. If you're not somewhere where you actually know exactly how many downloads you have per episode, how many people are listening, this is going to make it so difficult to make informed decisions. And we'll get into exactly what I look at for things, but first off, know that not all podcasting hosting platforms are made equal. So you want to make sure that it has that IAB certified kind of logo at the bottom or says something like that. So we've gotten to the base of that, I guess. First off, that's the best practice in the beginning. So, all right. So I think that clears a little bit about what is a good hosting platform or not, because, we can be a little bit of data nerds here, and we're going to hold off all of that data nerd energy just to show you things that you can really use. But the important thing is that not all downloads are streams or plays. These are three different things that we're talking about here. And so someone can play an episode, start listening to it, but actually they don't continue listening to it. So a download is something that some platforms, I think Spotify and some users auto downloads the episode to their phone. And when you follow a show, that show can be downloaded to their phone, but it may take them weeks for them to actually listen to that episode, or they may never listen to it. So just because you have a download, it does not mean that that download was listened by a real person. And so if you look and if you log on to Spotify for podcasters, they actually make that differentiation between the downloads, the streams, and the plays. Plays is actually the one that you want to make sure that you're looking at, right? If we're talking about hierarchy, that's the one. And so not every podcast platform has all of these data aggregated, because the problem with podcasting is it's not like YouTube where it's just one YouTube, right? You have multiple platforms. They are talking in different levels. There have been, if you work on a project management tool, everyone uses things differently. And so all of these different listening apps have been created, and they have been built in different ways by different people with better or worse technology. And so the communication back to your hosting platform where your podcast is hosted may differ in terms of clarity. And so that's why it's important to look at where are your listeners mainly coming from, right? And look at that platform. So I would say that's the best tip to get accurate data right away. So go directly to the platform, because that's going to be the best place to it. That would be my first tip.
I love that. Now, if you are a podcast manager, let's say, like myself, I don't always have access to everyone's, Spotify for podcasters or Apple Podcasts and seeing their backend and all that kind of stuff, because there's so many verifications. There's so many loopholes to jump through. I don't know if you can speak to this or not, but what would you recommend from that perspective in order to be able to understand that data if you have a hard time being able to see it?
Well, I would try to get the client once a month to actually sit down with me and to go over the numbers. And because people actually don't understand, they feel like this is super scary. There's just going to be a ton of information. But you doing it with them actually brings in value because you're showcasing your expertise in real time about helping them with through the all of the data that there's there. So you can do that. But I think that looking at if all you have and your client is like, I don't care, I don't want I don't want to sit down with you. What I would say is look at data in a way that is more like relative. So instead of looking at like download numbers by themselves, I would try to make parallels. Like, one, can I tell, is this hosting platform telling me when the downloads are happening, when there's like a surge, when which platform are they going into? But also at the same time is like, are there trends? I really like looking at clients' content and being like, okay, this episode, I know for a fact that this episode was super popular. Like, I know this client talks about this thing all the time. That's the fact, like, we talked about this as an episode because of that. And maybe when you look at it, you're looking and like, this episode didn't perform very well. Why was it? Like, was this because it was Christmas and nobody was listening? Was it because that week something happened and like the news cycle was like just like flooding people's inboxes with everything happening? Or something sometimes that I really like looking at is like, again, what happened in the world? And when there's like tragic events, nobody wants to hear about some topics that are very negative. So if your client is talking about things that are like, maybe it's a therapy podcast that talks about really heavy topics, just know that like it's sometimes the world,
the landscape of the world,
is affecting how that podcast is perceived. So don't look at things like, oh, this episode didn't perform well, therefore this wasn't a winner. Or maybe look back, like, what are people listening to time and time again, and looking into like how the client is using that content. Was it maybe something that the client was just like being very intimate and you're like, oh my God, they were so great, they were authentic, it painted a different picture of their business. So I think it's important to actually listen to your client's content to understand like numbers and data, because just looking at data by itself, I don't think it's enough.
I completely agree with you. And that's one thing that I love to do when I'm doing reviews on, I try and do them quarterly. I'll admit this has been the hardest thing for me to implement within my business because I feel like there's just so many different factors. That said, it is something that is a non-negotiable for me now because I need to understand the data. Like I need to understand, why this episode is performing better than another, if this social media strategy is working or if it's not, or if it's coming in from, we use like Chartable. And through Chartable, you can create smart links, like specific links, and you can track those links and you can track how many clicks those links, like those specific links get to each episode. So anyways, I feel like I need to like understand all of these different elements, right? And like knowing which episodes performed best each quarter, then, and exactly what you're saying, knowing like what has happened in the world, did everything go belly up again? You know what I mean? Or like, what has happened in the entire world for listenership to be impacted. Like we know that typically summertime, there's a little bit of a dip. People are, especially, I think about this, like I have a parenting podcast client and her podcast always goes a little bit lower. Actually, all of my parenting podcast clients, they kind of dip a little bit in the summertime, but that's because parents are at the cottages with their kids and they're out doing activities all day long. And they're like, their kids are at activities and like swimming, or maybe they're not driving their kids to school every single morning. So thinking about too, like how your listenership habit changes over time, I think is really important too. And understanding like how they will continue to change based off of where they are at in the year and what's happening there too. So I think there's so many different factors. It's so hard to just blanket statement say, oh, yep, you got 500 downloads this month, because there's so many factors as to why this month you got 500, this month you got 6, a year ago you got 1,000, tomorrow you get 900. Like there's no, and I think that's where creators can get frustrated. There's like, there really is no rhyme or reason. Sometimes an episode hits, it lands, it's a really good topic, it goes viral. I have episodes on my podcast that have had, I'm not even kidding you when I tell you the stats, like 180% increase in downloads on 3 specific episodes on my podcast. But it's because those episodes were very timely and they were very specific. And it was things that people were searching. whereas a lot of the other content that I create tends to be more not evergreen, but it is kind of evergreen because you can listen to it whenever you want. That specific content was stuff that people wanted to know right then and there. And it was right at the surge. It was like the AI episodes that you can listen to on this podcast. Those ones were things that people were searching for. So pairing all of these things together, I think, is absolutely genius because you want to consider your listener habits, your listeners' interests, what they're doing in their life in this moment, and also what is going on in the world around you. So you're so genius, Anna. It absolutely is all of these things. I love the way that you put that.
Well, it's all about like really not looking at podcasting as like this thing that is isolated from everything else, because we know that podcasting is the worst platform for new listeners to find you for discovery. And so it is tightly together to like, do you send a newsletter out? And this was so funny because I do consulting with clients. And so someone booked like a podcast audit and we were going through their stats and I was like, you send me these data and there was this surge here on a Wednesday. And he was like, yeah, like we don't really can understand because the podcast doesn't go out on like a whatever day. And I was like, do you send a newsletter? And they're like face palming. And they're like, oh my God, our newsletter goes out on Wednesdays. And it was just such a moment of realization for them because they were looking at it like, and this is something that I feel most podcasters struggle with, is understanding that every action that you have, like your content strategy and your podcast cannot be separated. They just have to be part of the same thing. Like clients may complain sometimes like, oh, my podcast isn't growing. And I'm like, are you actually using like your Instagram, which has like 20,000 followers, to talk about the podcast? And like, no, I do the bare minimum. Every episode is out. I talk about it once and then I never talk about it again. And I was like, well, that's why. And so people need to listen to your message 1,000 times. And it's not just the static images of saying like new episode is out. Like that doesn't tell me anything, right? Like tell me the story behind these episodes. Tell me what I'll learn. Give me a teaser that will get me super excited. And I feel like you, Simona, do so well your teasers. I appreciate the videos so well.
Wait till all of yours come out for this entire series.
Oh my God. I'm looking forward to this. But it's really understanding that your podcast needs kind of like friends, right? Like they need to, your audience needs to hear your podcast in different places because someone, and I hear this all the time. Oh, I have a newsletter, but I don't want to bother people because I know they listen to my podcast. So I'm like, remind them that the episode is out because maybe they had a crazy week. And I do this all the time. I have an automatic newsletter that goes out on Wednesdays, just like the basic data, which is like title, image, the teaser, like written, and then a link. And then on Fridays, they receive a secondary newsletter where I talk about something else and then I have the link again. And I always get clicks on the podcast because people, they're busy or whatever, and then maybe they want to listen to the podcast again. And so really looking at, are you doing the bare minimum? And if you're doing the bare minimum, you're getting bare minimum results. So where are you going traction? Like talking about like those smart links they were talking about. So many podcasters try all these different things and don't go back to see what's actually working within 2 months or 3 months. And that's something that is important to understand. Like, look at what's happening. Stop reinventing the wheel. So much of that is understanding what is working and go full in instead of trying to spread yourself thin everywhere. So I think that like honestly just look at those things are great starters, but also like how many times do you get the same question and how many times do you reply back? Instead of replying back like a whole ass essay, like send them the link to the episode. I don't think enough people do this.
That's genius.
I don't get it. Like
that is genius. That's definitely not something that I do.
All right. That's what you're going to do.
I've got my homework from today's episode. I think that's genius.
And actually be organized in how you organize your information. So basically have at least like an Excel spreadsheet or whatever. Like the less time it takes you to do something, the more likely you're, to do it. So basically have one link with all of your titles, all of the episode links. By the way, link to your podcast page on your website. Don't send them to Spotify because you're like, what if they have like Apple devices? What if, like you want to send people
them
to
Chartable. I send them to Chartable. So I create a link through Chartable, and I think like it's like link.chartable.com or something like that, and then you backslash and you put like your show, whatever. Like you can do it through Chartable, and then so you have, that's how I promote like As It Relates to Podcast. Actually, I do it for Happiness Happens too. I do it for both my podcasts, but they click on it, and then right there is like the embedded player essentially, and it's all driven from your RSS feed, right? And you can click play like directly on that link, or right at the top, there's all the icons: Apple, Spotify, YouTube, like Google, like all of them. All of them are there, and you just click your favorite platform, and then you can open it up in your favorite platform and listen to it from there.
Yeah, great idea. Even easier.
Thanks.
But yeah, so just think about like, also, this is like a huge no-no. Like, if people are not clicking, are you actually making them do a lot of work? Like, again, people are lazy. If the interest is, whose interest is this? You want them to listen. So make sure that you're not making them like go through the hoops. Like, send them directly to, don't make them like go and sign up to your newsletter to then get the episode if all they want is the episode. Like, do exactly what they're asking you, right? Like, it's so important to make sure that like the path of least resistance is present at all times. Don't make them do the work, because or sometimes like there's like gazillion links and people don't know what to do. Users, when they don't know what to do, they close the window, they have no action. So if no one is clicking on your stuff, why is it? Actually do the whole like journey as a user and see like, are people actually not getting to the episode? Do you have broken links? I had a client who was like, Anna, nobody is listening. And I was like, you have like 5 links and they all are so confusing. It's impossible to understand. And then there was one link that was broken. I was like, that's why nobody is listening. So, sometimes the answers is not that your content isn't good, is that actually, there was a technical issue. Like, again, you don't have to assume that just everything is like broken or you did something wrong. Sometimes it's just like tech issues. Tech issues.
I was waiting for it. Oh my God, Anna, so much gold in here. So I want to recap really quick and tell me if I've missed anything. So we want to make sure that we are paying attention to, first of all, that you're on a platform that has IAB stats on it. Secondly, we want to make sure that we're not just looking at our hosting platform data. We also want to go into Spotify for podcasters, and we want to go into our like Spotify.podcast or whatever that website is. I'll put it in the links. I'll put it in the show notes. And then Apple as well, to understand how many plays we're getting, because downloads and plays are different. And then we want to map out the customer journey. We want to make sure that it makes sense, and the way that they're getting to the episode it makes sense. We also want to make sure that if people are asking for the information, instead of giving them a direct reply, we can send them the link and always push them back to those different episodes. I think that's really key. And then we also talked about in there understanding the climate, if you will, of the world and your listener habits and audience habits and all of that, and seeing how that impacts the downloads and the listenership and the retention rate and all of that. And did I miss anything in our little recap there?
No, I think you did well. I was just reminded of a couple of things that I want to make sure that I do share. So basically, people look at like downloads as like a one-time thing. So like, oh, we did this episode and it had so many downloads. I wish we could replicate it. I'm like, do it. Release that same episode as a replay. Or,
which is good. We're getting into it in our next episode, so I don't want to spoil it.
Or do it again. Like, I had a client, we've done the three versions of the same episode because it just works really well and people love it and are like, more of that, please. So give this as a recommendation for your client, that sometimes, hey, this information is outdated, but we know this is a winner. We know this is a winner. And so people love hearing like things like, oh my gosh, these 3 episodes were the bomb. Like, keep telling them the things that or telling them, as if you are a podcast manager or if you are the podcaster, really highlight the ones that are like happening, they're like going and doing super well, and tell your audience, oh my God, have you listened to this episode? How many people, like, let's say 300 people this week downloaded this episode. Have you? Like, go, right? Like, oh my God, like, use that. Everything is content. So, you don't need to be capped. You can just like go and share those episodes. And I'm already getting myself ahead of like schedule. But honestly, I think those downloads are like really important, like looking at data. as, something that is exciting because it gives you clarity instead of just like, oh, numbers. I feel disappointed because I don't know, I'm looking at numbers and they're not what I thought they would be by now. It's like, okay, what are the numbers telling me? That would be like the tip.
I love that. I think that's amazing. And I'm so glad that you added that in there. I think that's perfect. And I'm really excited for the last part of our series because we're going to be going into this idea of like repurposing episodes and content and taking a break and setting up the back end and like taking a step back and being able to do all of that. So be sure that you're subscribed to the podcast so that you don't miss it. That's all I'm going to say. Thank you, Ana, for coming on here today.
Thank you. It was great.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode of As It Relates to Podcasting with my guest, Ana. All of her links can be found in the show notes below. Be sure to connect with her on social media. Say hello and connect with me so that I know what you loved from this conversation today. Thanks again so much. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe the show and share it with another creator that you know needs this help today. Okay, I'll see you on the flip side.